Talking with Jerry.
Don't forget to like and especially to subscribe. Very important, please subscribe. So I want to do a little something different this evening. I wanted to do a little critique on Dr. Boyce Watkins. Now, if you don't know who Dr. Boyce Watkins is, he has a YouTube channel. Very intelligent brother, has a degree in finance, a doctorate, does a lot of commentary on various subjects. Sometimes he post things on a daily basis. But I wanted to discuss briefly his comments about the Grammys, his comments about African Americans owning sports teams, putting on award shows such as the Grammys, and why those things are really next to impossible. So a lot of times, I would say, not just sometimes, on YouTube, I'll see black YouTubers talk about, well, we should have our own award show. We have the athletes who could play in our own sports leagues. We should have our own networks to do some of the things that we see other people making money off of. And it's easy to throw those things out there, but what is the reality of owning some of those things, trying to make them financially viable? And how much would it cost? Is it millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars? 100 million, or is it billions of dollars? Something that most black celebrities, even athletes, don't have access to that type of cash. So I want us to, as I said, take a look at Dr. Boyce Watkins, some of his comments on the Grammys first, and then I'll come back with my thoughts.
I don't understand for the life of me why you got all these artists that are world famous that don't just create their own award show and say F you to the Grammys. You no longer have the ability to evaluate black talent. You no longer have the right to do that. We're not going to let you do that. We're going to judge and evaluate ourselves, and we're going to evaluate each other. And you're not even invited to the party. I have no idea why they haven't done that. Because if you look up the history of the Oscars and the Grammys, one thing you'll notice is that stuff is pretty much all made up. It's all made up.
So that was really a mouthful and very interesting. But these are my comments about what Dr. Boyce Watkins had to say. And where in many cases, I think he's totally off track and wrong. Though on many of his podcasts, I agree with him, I got to totally disagree this time. First of all, the Recording Academy has an African American as its current president, Harvey Mason. Okay, so we have an African American running it, a young brother at that. He has appointed 2 new vice presidents of the organization. So under him, there's new leadership that reports to him. So to speak, he's kind of cleaned house. In addition, he's appointed a diversity and inclusion officer, so that there's someone not only that from a staffing standpoint, people within the organization coming in will be a diversified group, but everything that they need to put on the Grammys, there's going to be diversity and inclusion every step of the way. So as far as framing it as these other people or this other group is doing the Grammys, it seems like, we have black people that are in charge of the Grammys. And this because there has been a lot of flack to the Oscars, to the Emmys, many of these award shows. And whether you want to call it Hollywood or the entertainment industry, is starting to step forward and do the right thing. And as I said, the head of the Academy is a black man, Harvey Mason. And they are being very inclusive. if you look at the Grammys, the show itself, I mean, hip hop was more or less the predominant music. I mean, it got the most hype in terms of promotion because it was the 50th anniversary of hip hop. They had a stellar performance by some of the greatest hip hop icons of the beginning of hip hop. My only argument with that was that it was unfortunate that the Sugar Hill Gang was not included, since that was the first rap record. Um, and also Curtis Blow was not included. I did speak to Curtis, he was there, but he had the first rap record that was ever released by a major label. And I felt that that was a shortcoming. But other than that, that segment was excellent. And then, of course, the Grammys closed with a hip hop performance by Jay-Z, Rick Ross, DJ Khaled, and several others, which was excellent. Though it's not my theme of music per se, those that are into hip hop should have been very happy. And many years on the Grammys in the past, hip hop was not even mentioned. They may have said earlier tonight from R&B, this hip hop artist won an award. So they have really moved in a different direction. Also now, Beyonce, as you know if you watch the Grammys, she won 4 awards, totaling 32 wins. That's huge, the most ever. As far as the ratings go, it's I think they are close to 12.5 million people for a 3-year ratings high, from what I read, and the ratings are up over the past viewings of the Grammys 2 years prior. So in today's world, doing close to 13 million people to watch something, even though it's on network television, is a really good number. When you want to look at these award shows and say, well, maybe, why don't Black people, we have our own award show? So let's deconstruct that. In the past, we've had the Soul Train Music Awards, which was produced by Don Cornelius, who was a Black man. I attended 3 Soul Train Music Awards out in California in the past myself, and it was an excellent show. And as I said, put on by Don Cornelius, who's no longer with us, who, as you know, unless you're a very young person, Don Cornelius created Soul Train. In addition to that, many years later, we had the BET Awards. Though when BET was sold to Viacom and Southern Redstone, which is now Paramount CBS, they were able to afford to put on a big BET Awards show, which in the past, when Bob Johnson owned it, he could not afford to do that, even though BET was Black owned then. You had the Source Awards. The Source magazine was partially Black owned, and they had an award show, which long preceded anything in the hip hop arena. So those are just some past award shows that Black people have been involved in terms of ownership, and they were done well. They couldn't compete with something like the Grammys, and this is what I want to talk about now. So when you look at trying to put on the show equivalent to the Grammys, in 2018, just going back a few years ago, the Grammys had a shortfall in their production of $8 million when it was going to be held in New York City. And New York City, the city itself, through this tourism board, had to come and kick in money and services because the Grammys were short money. New York City contributed $5 million. These shows cost millions and millions of dollars to produce. When you look at the staging, the renting of the venue, all the rehearsals, the flying in of all the performing artists, the hotel bills, the bands, the orchestras, the production companies. There's so much that's involved. He's mentioned, Dr. Watkins, about award shows even for Black film, something like the Oscars. Well, the Oscars last year cost $43 million to produce. $43 million. So I don't know where we're going to get a number of African American artists or actors to come up with 43 to maybe $50 million to put on something like the Oscars to give awards to African American actors. I mean, it's a nice pipe dream, but it's not reality. If you think that things like the Grammys and the Oscars, now we're jumping from music to acting, is expensive. Now I want to take a moment to go to some other comments by Dr. Boyce Watkins, where he talks about sports and sports leagues, and then come back and address what those things cost. It's really going to shock you, but let's listen to his suggestions here.
$1 trillion asset that literally you're giving birth to. And yet, despite all that, despite the fact that you are the number one manufacturers of the greatest athletes on the planet, you're still bragging about owning 1% of a white man's football team. No disrespect to Ward Dunn at all. I like Ward Dunn. I'm going to say this, I'm going to be clear about that. So it ain't no dissing at all. But I don't give a damn about 1% of shit. Like 1% means nothing to me when you should have owned 98%. You should have owned the whole damn league. These athletes, all these guys run around bragging, pretending to be bosses. You know, I saw Jay-Z rapping. I walked past the TV. My kids was watching the Grammys. I don't tell them what they can't watch. They can get into all that stuff. I just don't. I just said I got stuff to do. I got more important things to do than sit around and idolize stupid celebrities. So I walked past because some of them I've met. You know, celebrities call me sometimes. I just, you know, it is what it is. But I walk past the TV and I see Jay-Z rapping. He's sitting in front of this big old table with all this food, and he's sitting with some other guys, and they pretend to be bosses, like they having a big feast, and he's just rapping. And the song was terrible. It really wasn't that good. But he's just like rapping away or whatever. But of course, people are going to say it's a genius because he said it. Right? That's what we do, right? Because we don't know what's actually good and bad. We just look for other people. Well, did y'all think it was good? Okay, y'all thought it was lit? Then I'm gonna think it's lit too because I want to fit in. I don't give a damn about fitting in. So Jay-Z's sitting there rapping. And I'm sitting there thinking, all these damn rappers run around like they bosses and kings and all this other stuff. You ain't no damn king. You don't own nothing. How the hell you gonna call yourself a king when you are on your knees begging to own 1% of somebody else's asset? Remember when Jay-Z owned the Brooklyn Nets and they told y'all that Jay-Z was going to be the owner of the Brooklyn Nets? I'm not dissing Jay-Z. I promise you, I'm not. If it sounds like I am, I know I'm going to get in trouble. I got to let it out. But remember when he owned when they made y'all think he was really going to own the Brooklyn Nets and y'all got all this fake pride in the idea that a black man was going to own an NBA team? Do you know how much he actually owned? He owned literally like 1/16 of 1%. That means if you took the whole team and chopped it into 100 pieces, 99 pieces go to the white guys from Russia. One piece, now there's one piece but Jay-Z doesn't get that whole one piece. If you take that one piece out of 99, out of 100, and chop it into 16 pieces, he gets 1/16 of 1%. Like imagine getting chopping a pizza into like 1,600 pieces and you get one. That's the best you can do? That's your black excellence? That's what your black excellence looks like? Well, no wonder you in last place. No wonder.
Running a sports franchise, I mean, a team is bad enough, but a league, a franchise. So we're going to look at the NFL, the NBA, MLB, which is Major League Baseball, and the PGA, which is Professional Golfers Association, golf. Now, the last NFL team that was sold for billions of dollars, $4.6 billion, the Walton family, that is the heir to Walmart stores. And, you know, football teams, once again, they sell for the billions of dollars just for one team. If we look at the NFL, you look at the face of the NFL. Here's the Super Bowl coming up this weekend. You have Patrick Mahomes, okay? He's with the Kansas City Chief. His contract, that one player, is a $450 million contract. That's just one guy. One player, Patrick Mahomes. His contract, $450 million. And that's football. Now we can jump to basketball. And in basketball, the average salary is $11.9 million a player. $11.9 million per player. Okay, we can go to Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball, the average salary is $4.3 million. But the face of Major League Baseball, Aaron Judge, just did a 9-year contract with the New York Yankees, $360 million. He just signed a $360 million contract. That's one player, Major League Baseball. Now let's go to the PGA Tour, which is the Professional Golfers Association. Though Tiger Woods is not the Tiger Woods that he was a decade ago, but in his height in the early 2000s into the late 2000s, really even past 2010, Tiger Woods was averaging $100 million a year on average. So he was making between $90 million on the low side to as much as $110 million. Now, that's not just on the golf course. Of course, he had money coming in from his sponsors, American Express, Buick, Nike, etc. But still, he was $100 million a year man on average. So when we look at sports, just these individual players, if you were going to have a team, look what you need to field the competitive team. When you have salaries of each player in the NBA averaging over $11 million, when you have a football team and you have a quarterback, one player who has a contract worth over $400 million, or a baseball player like on the New York Yankees, Judge, who has a contract of over $300 million. Trying to be competitive just on the team level is very difficult. And we talked about how much it costs to own these teams. So whether it's having star players, whether it's owning a team, which can cost into the billions of dollars, is a Jay-Z or a LeBron James an athlete or a musician? Are they even liquid to lay out that kind of money? And the answer is no. I mean, an example of that would be someone like Kanye West, who everybody was running around, including himself, saying, oh, he's a billionaire. But now he owes $50 million in taxes, and he can't even pay that. And of course, we see what happened to his alleged $1 billion. It evaporated just as much as Jay-Z's ownership in the Brooklyn Nets, which he was the owner, but when the truth came out, he owned 1/16 of 1%. The next thing that Dr. Boyce Watkins talked about was maybe owning a league. So if you think fielding a team with great players is expensive, if you think owning a team is expensive, let's just look at starting a league. But I want to first of all say that yes, in history, Dr. Watkins is right, African Americans did own sports leagues. We had Negro League Baseball. But what a lot of times people don't talk about with something like Negro League Baseball, that was not only in the 1920s, and there was no near the money that exists today in sports because there was no television revenue, because there weren't televisions. But even those teams were funded by, in many cases, black gangsters. But it was a different type of gangster. It was people that were in the numbers business, the policy business. And these were some people back in that era that had a lot of money in the black community. Though it was an illegal business, everybody played numbers. It was something that everybody and their mother did in the neighborhood, and people didn't look down on it. And these numbers barons were the backers of many of the Negro League baseball teams. So that existed many, many years ago. Also, we had a Black Basketball League. Hal Jackson, who I knew, who was the first black man to be a broadcaster on radio in this country, and who was a broadcaster and part owner of WBLS radio station. And he had something that he called Hal Jackson's Talented Teens. He owned the basketball team back in that era, not the 1920s, but a little bit later. I think it was in the 1930s and 40s. As far as golf, there were black golf leagues many years ago, because it is a fact, black men were not allowed to be on the PGA Tour. It was in the actual covenant of the Professional Golfers Association that black men could not be professional golfers. They could not play. They weren't allowed. And what black men did do was they formed their own league, and they had tournaments around the country, and they had to travel on their own. And the prize money was not a lot. Wealthy black doctors or black businessmen would put up the prize money, and maybe they would win $10,000, $20,000 to play in a particular tournament. So I'll give Boyce Watkins credit for that, because yes, at the turn of the century, whether it was baseball, whether it was basketball, whether it was golf, you did have black entrepreneurs who were financing leagues, so to speak. But now, would it be feasible to do that? First of all, not only is it not profitable, there's so much money in sports nowadays that these athletes, as I've talked about, the type of contracts that they have, they're not going to walk away from that kind of money to go with some kind of upstart league. That's not going to happen. And that's what I want to mention now about starting an upstart league. Now, as you may know, there have been numerous attempts to start other football leagues. They've all failed. You had the USFL, which Donald Trump was involved in with the New Jersey Generals, and Herschel Walker was the star player, the star running back who recently ran for senator in Georgia. And that league went out of business with all of the owners losing a fortune. Vince McMahon tried to do a football league, went out of business. Vince McMahon and the partners in that lost, I don't want to say hundreds of millions of dollars, but they each individually lost tens of millions of dollars. Now, Dwayne Johnson, who is The Rock, recently bought that league, and he bought the rights to it, and he's trying to get it going again. I don't know the status of who the various owners are around the country, but in seeing, one of the games, there were very few people there. I don't know how it could possibly survive, and it can't compete against the NFL. It was mentioned that Ice Cube with his three-man basketball league, but that's not going to be able to compete with the NBA. It's funded by a white financier. And in addition to that, there's also Middle Eastern oil money that's behind that. They did get some money from CBS, Paramount, Viacom to get it off the ground as well, because they're airing it on their network on Sundays. But if you watch the games, they can't even give away tickets to get people to go. The arenas are basically empty. The tickets that they sell are very moderately priced, just for a few dollars. And I don't think it's a business plan that's going to work. But let's look at one other league that was an upstart, which I happen to be at. And I could say that I know quite a bit about the LIV Golf League because I was there at its initial launch for several days as a VIP and as part of the black press as well. And I got exposed to their whole operation, and the Saudis put a lot of money into it. Last year was just launched, which is a new golf league to compete with the PGA Tour. It's funded by the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia. And as you may or may not know, whether you follow golf or not, you may have seen headlines where they have offered some golfers as much as $200 million to sign and be on that league. Well, it was just reported, as you can see here as I'm posting it, that last year they lost $1 billion. They were in business 1 year and they've already lost $1 billion, and that's in golf. So when Dr. Boyce Watkins talks about, well, why don't we start our own leagues, and why don't we do, there's not a lot of black people who can pull together $1 billion liquid cash, okay, not borrowed, and then afford to lose it in a year on a fantasy of owning a whole league or some sports franchise. It's very expensive. And in addition to that, what do you do moving forward? What is your revenue stream? And the LIV Golf League has just signed a TV deal with a small TV network, but they could not get a deal with any of the major networks, CBS, NBC, or ABC, TNT. They were in talks with Fox. They couldn't make it happen. Now, maybe it'll happen 2 or 3 years from now, but can they afford to continue to lose $1 billion a year? So if you're going to start a sports league, be it football, basketball, if you want to compete with the NBA or Major League Baseball, no one's watching baseball anymore on television. The ratings go down more and more every year. Where's the money coming from to compete? And the last thing that I want to point out is television, which is Dr. Boyce Watkins mentioned about these streaming services, and why can't we, have a network either to compete or to present these various entities on a platform. Well, Disney, as you may have seen in the news the last few days, as its former president has come back and take over the reins, he just announced that he's laying off 8,000 people and that they had a huge loss this year. Where was that billion-dollar loss? Primarily from their streaming services, trying to launch new channels. The theme park, Disney World and Disneyland, was extremely profitable. It made $1 billion, their theme parks. But trying to compete in the television market where you have the networks, you have over 300 cable channels, then you have everything from Apple TV to Amazon TV trying to compete. You have Netflix, then you have Hulu, trying to compete in this world. To start a streaming service today, if you don't have $1 billion to put in, you're doomed for failure. I'm not talking about a cable network. I'm talking about a streaming service that you want people to pay for, because the content that you're going to have to produce costs a fortune. The last thing I want to mention is about has to do with Tyler Perry. Dr. Boyce Watkins mentioned Tyler Perry. Tyler Perry is a genius. I did compete with him when I was doing plays, and Medea character was just too much to take on. So he definitely outdrew me in terms of attendance, and was something that I just didn't have the resources to compete when I was trying to produce plays. But Tyler Perry is successful. Why? Because he has the studios that he has where he produces all of his own content, but he already has people buying that content. He's not producing it and then trying to go out and sell it. No, he has BET, which is owned by, used to be Viacom, which is now Paramount CBS. Okay? He has a deal with Netflix, and they're funding him with several $100 million a year to produce shows that they're going to air on those networks. So he knows he has enough revenue coming in to pay the actors, to pay for the sound stages, to pay for the production. It's not like he has to do all this and now he has to go out there and shop it and hope as a production company that he's going to get some of his money back. He's in a great position because he's created a brand, and as African Americans, people love his content, and the people who own the channels or who own the streaming services or who own the networks need content to put on. They value the black audience because black people watch TV almost 3 times as much as any other ethnic group. Therefore, Tyler Perry gets paid up front to produce shows that the networks can buy for him. So he knows ahead of time how many tens of millions, in cases hundreds of millions of dollars, depending on how much content he's going to give them in a given year, he's going to have that he can then not sell because he's going to own it, to give them to put on their networks. So it's a quite different situation from starting a network, starting a streaming service, as I said, what some of those numbers are. So I hope you really got some knowledge about how difficult it can be to do some of the things that Dr. Boyce Watkins, and I hear so many other people say, oh, well, LeBron James and so, they should just form their own league. Oh, why doesn't so-and-so, these football players, and they get treated terrible by the owners, and they should just start their own football league. Oh, well, Beyonce didn't win as much as she should have won at this year's Grammys. You know, we need to have our own Grammys. Well, those are some of the hardcore numbers that it would take. And I don't know where the money's coming from, but it's great to have these dreams. So don't forget to subscribe. I'll always try to give you some information and knowledge that maybe you're not going to find other places. I continue to make sense out of the nonsense.